who's right here to my left. To her left is Raja Kushal Nagar, professor at Gallaudet University. To his left is Greg Pollock, vice president of business development for communication service for the deaf. And finally, on the end is Roshan Martin, UX researcher, accessibility and inclusion at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
All right. Well, I'm excited to have this wonderful group of panelists here. Would you mind introducing yourselves and give us your name? Tell us what program or business you're currently working on and what's your role. We'll first start with Raja.
Hello, my name is Raja Kushnalgar. I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's okay because the interpreter doesn't know how to say it either. I just want to emphasize this because written English is my first language, and sign languages as well. I'm a professor at Gallaudet University. I'm in the new program, a co-director with another professor who is here, Christian Fulger, and Abraham Glacier. He's a new professor at Gallaudet University in the new master's program with accessibility and computing.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you for having me on the panel. My name is Greg Pollock, and I am a white guy with brown hair. I am wearing a white button-up shirt with a bluish-gray vest and a blue bow tie. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at CSD, Communication Services for the Deaf. CSD is the nation's largest deaf nonprofit organization dedicated to elevating the lives of deaf and hard of hearing people in every aspect of their life, be it healthcare, entrepreneurship, telecommunications, employment, learning, and we have so many different areas that we're focusing on investing in to make an impact on deaf people's lives and elevate their life experience and even their jobs. So I focus on telecommunication solutions, and we help companies or organizations engage with their deaf and hard of hearing customers with customer service. We have a solution that prevents barriers and in technology.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roshan Matthew. My pronouns are he, him. I wear a rose pink shirt with a blue pen. So I'm a graduate student at the Rochester Institute of Technology, majoring in human-computer interaction. My primary research interest lies in the areas of accessibility and wearable technology such as Internet of Things, augmented reality, and virtual reality. I currently work as a UX UI research assistant at the XR Accessibility Solutions Laboratory, part of the NTID Deaf Healthcare and Biomedical Science Hub. So our team there have developed an application that facilitates remote real-time interpreting and captioning through AR smart glasses for deaf and hard of hearing people. We have been focusing especially on how this application can improve language accessibility for deaf people in healthcare and educational contexts. As a UX researcher, I primarily work with end users, working on collecting their feedback, discussing issues with them, running studies, analyzing data, and how to use those findings to improve our product. So that's basically our role there.
Awesome. So how are your products or projects or business? What is it that you've noticed that happens in the deaf community that you're hoping to be able to address with your business or products?
This is Raja speaking from Gallaudet University, the only university for deaf and hard of hearing students within the world. It's a standalone entity. We focus heavily on bilingual education, and we're adding a new focus on accessibility really focusing on how to make different types of technology, information, and communications accessible to deaf, deaf and hard of hearing, deaf-blind, and other communities. We have a new master's program. We're training students on accessing technology protocols. Excuse the interpreter, policy.
Accessible. This is Greg. CSD was founded to solve a problem for deaf and hard of hearing people, which was communication. Prior to 1975, deaf people had to rely on their parents, friends, and family members, neighbors, to make phone calls for them. If they wanted to order pizza, a deaf person had to rely on somebody else to do that for them. And in 1975, the TTY was born. Probably a lot of you, who knows of what the TTY is? 50-50, okay. The TTY is a keyboard that lets deaf people type, and the phone, a landline handheld, was put onto some little cups, and the typing would make sounds, and that would send a message to another TTY. The problem was, for me to communicate with somebody else, it would only be to another TTY. So I was limited, or I, as a deaf person in 1975, would be limited to who it is that I could make calls to. So there was a guy in South Dakota who decided to set up something new. He hired hearing people to sit in front of these TTY keyboards and accept phone calls from TTYs and then type to them, okay, hello, you would like to make a call, who would you like to call? And this was the start of the first relay service in 1975. Fast forward to 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law. In the ADA, Section 4 has the telecommunications part that is heavily focused on providing deaf and hard of hearing people communication via the phone. So the Telecommunications Act was signed, and the Federal Communications Commission looked to CSD and said, hey, we want your model that you've got going on in South Dakota to be nationwide. Because they had just been operating on a state grant in South Dakota. So in the 90s, these relay services centers are set up throughout the United States so that people like myself could make a call to anyone without any barriers. The only challenge was I was still reliant on a third party to facilitate the conversation. Because technology at the time wasn't ready for us to have direct communication with each other. We still needed to depend on somebody else to help us make these phone calls. In the early 2000s, Sprint and CSD partnered to develop a relay service that was using sign language. It was a video relay service. And at the time, video technology was becoming more widespread and more adopted. FaceTime wasn't a thing yet. We didn't have cameras on our phones at the time, but Sprint and CSD worked together to develop the video relay service model where instead of a person typing at the TTY and making these phone calls, now you had an interpreter on the screen connecting with the deaf person, and they were signing back and forth, and then the interpreter would make the phone call. So now we're looking back at what the ADA actually said as far as providing the maximum efficient communication. Congress at the time when they enacted the ADA, they didn't want a third person in the conversation. They said, this isn't an equitable experience for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. We want to eliminate the third person. So they wrote the language in a way that they could mature the model as technology and things like that matured. The problem was, how do we get rid of this third person? And this is what CSD is constantly trying to think. Okay, how do we come up with a point-to-point communication? Is this possible? So CSD came up with a new model called direct video calling. It's so simple. It's really not that high tech, to be honest with you. It just involves hiring deaf people to support other deaf people in business or government environments where deaf people are calling into. So I, Greg, can call into somewhere, let's say the IRS, without having to worry about my personal information having to be shared through a third party that's not been vetted in the process. Because that third person, that interpreter, hasn't been vetted or trained specifically on IRS issues or your company's brand, right? So CSD's really been trying to make the case for more equitable communication, direct video calling, and we're really encouraging companies, agencies to accept this type of system and to design it as such. You know, systems are really designed with hearing people in mind. Phone trees are not very accessible. You know, IVR systems are very difficult to get through, especially calling through an interpreter. But, you know, making it so that a deaf person can call and connect with whatever agency it is that they want to within their workforce, directly to a customer service rep using American Sign Language, and that would be fantastic for people like myself.
At XR-ESL, I work under the supervision of Ms. Wendy Daniels. Several years ago, she received a National Science Foundation grant to develop near-eye display systems for middle school deaf and hard of hearing students to make STEM content accessible to them, especially like in interactive settings such as a museum or a planetarium, places like that. So that was the origin of our project. And then as we progressed, we started looking at other potential applications for our product, and healthcare and education emerged as one of the most critical areas where deaf and hard of hearing individuals would benefit significantly from such technologies. From there we transitioned into healthcare and education as well. So across all these areas, we are trying to address primarily three key challenges. Namely, the first one is the limitation of line of sight. Second one is the limitation of sustained attention. And the third one is the limitation of executing activities. So when I say limitation of line of sight, it involves, in the context of a healthcare consultation, for example, when a deaf person goes to see a doctor, they will have the doctor present in the room, another healthcare provider perhaps. There will be an interpreter, or they may have to look at the VRI screen, or there might be a captioning screen. So they will have to focus on multiple different things at the same time. For also the case where when we ran studies, we found several examples where hospital settings often involves like very small rooms and with large equipments, and often keeping a VRI tablet or a captioning tablet next to them is often not feasible. So we had to come up with a system that kind of like allows the deaf person to see the interpreter or the captions in their line of sight. The second one is limitation of sustained attention. And this is, for example, I'll give you an example. So there, again, in the healthcare context, a healthcare provider or a doctor might need to explain a treatment plan or a diagnosis while they have the patient look at a medical report or some similar artifacts. So it is important that the deaf patient needs to look at the reports or the demonstration to understand it, but they also have to split their attention between looking at those as well as looking at their doctor, as well as looking at their interpreter or the captioning display. So that is often challenging because it places a lot of cognitive stress on people. And the third one is a limitation of executing activities. Again, as an example, say for example, a deaf person needs to go to a physiotherapist where they need to follow along doing a certain kind of movement or do some kind of physical rehabilitation activity. So they have to do a movement at the same time they are getting the instructions. So sometimes splitting that attention often has certain costs attached to it. So these are the three challenges that we are trying to address using smart classes, where you can see the interpreter, who is a real interpreter or a real captioner, typing out the captions as they look through the smart classes. So they can actually look at the doctor or the medical report at the same time they have access to the interpreter as well as captions in their line of sight. So now this often, I understand that this also has applications in other use cases, and we are looking into several others, but so far we have heavily researched into educational and healthcare context. So that's what we are currently doing.
I would like to add, if I could, this is Raja speaking. I wanted to add a little bit more about the goals that we have. We have a goal to expand the capacity of deaf and hard of hearing individuals to solve their own problems and increase the number of investigators and researchers and developers and their allies to be able to work together to solve various issues. Like Greg mentioned, back in the 1920s, all the movies were silent, and then the deaf and hard of hearing people had access to the movies. Because it was silent, there was no spoken language, they had subtitles, it was perfect. Then they added audio to the movies, and immediately deaf individuals were not able to access that content. If we had involved deaf people from the beginning, because we had captions in other languages in other countries, but not here. For 50 years here in America, they did not have captions on movies until the 1970s. We need more and more involvement for deaf and hard of hearing individuals to help shift and change the landscape. We don't want to see something like this happen again. Like, for example, we have the GUI computer systems, and then we were not able to use, interpreter. Blind people were not able to use computers because of the GUI system. And it took many, many years to really be able to make computing accessible to blind users. And it was only because of their involvement that they were able to make those changes and improvements. Today, technology is becoming much more interactive. It speaks, gives auditory cues, there's Braille, there's tactile things. So we need to continue to involve developers and policies, making sure that technology is inclusive from the beginning. You've seen the phrase born again? Or no, maybe it's born once technology. That's the phrase that I think is really important to highlight. We need to have policies and programs that help involve people from the beginning, so we do not have these issues.
That's so great. It's really interesting to see how all of your businesses and projects have emerged and developed along the way. So what do you feel like a challenge that your team has faced? What's a challenge that your team has faced along the way? Like for you, Raja, you're setting up an application. What are challenges currently? Have the challenges changed from the beginning?
Well, let me give you an example of captions. We looked at captions to figure out how we could improve the accuracy. And it actually was an interesting process to see the variation in how people use captions as a tool. So we have a goal now to use captions to fit a person's ability so that they are able to understand it uniquely. There's other things that we've realized also where technology and how people use technology requires a variation in people's needs, and it meets needs. And we see now AI is helping with those things. It's causing a paradigm shift. And so we're really excited to be helping with that.
This is great. I think for CSD, we've got several things. I can think of 3 that I'll talk about. Deaf and hard of hearing people tend to be an afterthought when it comes to products and services. People don't think about us when they're designing the experience. Like an IVR. When I call in and deal with an IVR phone tree, it was not built for deaf people. It is built for hearing people to speak or respond to it. So I think how deaf people interact with that experience, and really the call center model that's been in place for 40 or 50 years, I feel like it hasn't really matured to evolve to what it could be. And that's where we're here, to shift that paradigm, to get you to see things from a different lens, include deaf and hard of hearing people in the design. The second part is also, there are a lot of companies and organizations out there who don't see the problem. They don't see how deaf and hard of hearing individuals interact with their product. It just isn't happening. I say that because when you think about AI captioning, for example, a lot of companies have come out and said, this is the next hot thing for accessibility. And it is, but nobody actually thinks about the fact that we use sign language. And how is that going to get translated, or how is that going to get interpreted? It's a one-directional thing. The hearing people are feeding it, not deaf people like me. I do a lot of under-the-table work trying to change that, and guys like who are sitting next to me are doing great stuff with that, but I feel like we're still so far behind. See, that the news is really very much behind on that. Interpreter clarification. The laws and regulations are behind on that because they're written from the 70s and potentially the 90s. Hopefully, things will change with the new CVTA bill that is on the table right now, but the fact that we're still so far behind. As a deaf person, to interact with a hearing company, if I say, hey, I have some struggles with your accessibility model, they would always say, well, we're in compliance. We're in compliance. But most of the time, they don't even know what compliance actually means. If you look at the language in the ADA, it says to maximize the most possible efficient way. Well, if you read it, the writing, they have not maximized any of this. So this is the concern of, my concern is that we're becoming satisfied with the status quo of what it is that we had in place from 1975 or 1990. The third and last part that I wanted to mention before I pass it along is deaf people and hearing people have become so reliant on the mindset that we need a communication assistant to facilitate communication between a deaf person and a hearing person. Those communication assistants aren't just they're not there for deaf people. They're there because hearing people don't know sign language. But we've become so entrenched in that we have to bring somebody else into the conversation. We don't think about how is it that we communicate more directly from a deaf person to a deaf person? How could we just make this be a point-to-point conversation and eliminate a third party entirely? I don't think that there's enough of that being mapped out, honestly. I mean, I think for customer interactions, for call centers, when we're training new employees, we show them the playbook, the wireframe of how the communication is broke down. Okay, if this happens, then this. But we don't factor deaf people into that experience. That mapping out doesn't include deaf people in the things of what might happen. So it's really kind of how do you become less entrenched, less ingrained in that model? And how do you come up with new products, new innovative things? Maybe you do that up front with all of your projects, all your project managers. Add the question in the beginning, is this accessible? Is my concept, this idea that I'm trying to push, that I'm trying to manifest, is it accessible? And if you don't know what the answer is to the question, you hire a deaf person. You don't hire a hearing run agency or rely on an interpreter to feed you that information. No, hire a deaf person to help map out that experience, and they can tell you exactly what it is that they're looking for and that they would want. I guarantee you a deaf person will be able to answer your questions, and they will be your friend. Roshan?
For our project, we primarily have two main challenges, and that's personal and then technology. So at RIT, our lab operates within an academic setting, and almost all our team members are students. And while some of us have been working on this project for a few years, most of the students come in for a semester or two for their co-op experiences or internships. So while that gives us a lot of advantages in terms of bringing in diverse perspectives and fresh ideas to the table, it also affects the long-term stability of the project in terms of the people working on it. The second challenge is technology, I would say, because the technological landscape, especially when it comes to emerging technologies such as augmented reality, is constantly evolving. And there are always new companies and new products that are coming out almost very frequently. And so it is crucial for us to identify partnerships with smart glasses manufacturers that gives us a bit of stability in the long term. For example, I can talk about the case of Microsoft's HoloLens. So HoloLens is a mixed reality smart glasses. So there was a lot of hype around HoloLens until very recently, but although it was launched by such a big company as Microsoft, their product line kind of faded away recently, and we were really excited to see future iterations of those product lines. So it is crucial for us to scope out the technological landscape and identify partnerships that kind of like gives us long-term stability and also develop strategies that helps us to be robust and also like flexible that changes with technology in the long term. So yeah, those were, I would say, the primary changes. But over the last few years, we also had to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic because we are heavily reliant on user feedback. We test and we run a lot of studies involving deaf and hard of hearing people. And that is really, really important for us. And because of that, the pandemic and the restrictions surrounding it, we were not able to go out to hospitals or live classroom settings to actually test our products. So we are also like looking into identifying partnerships to kind of like get more feedback from these key stakeholders that are involved in the project. So now that the pandemic has kind of like eased out, I think that probably is not a challenge for us, but it taught us a lot of lessons in terms of how to develop a product when we don't have access to the important resources that we critically need. And we have identified strategies that might help in future if we come across those kind of challenges again. So.
Wow, that's so interesting how these various challenges all have a similar mindset of how is it that we improve communication access for deaf and hard of hearing people. Dr. Kushal Nagar, how is it that people have been responding to your proposed solution? How, interpreter clarification, the healthcare industry, how have they been responding?
Our master's program at Gallaudet University has developed an app to inform when an incident happens. For example, many deaf and hard of hearing people have fluency in both English and sign language, but they're most often more comfortable in ASL than in English. So we will give them an informed consent within English, and it'll be hard for them to interpret it. It'll be hard for them to understand it. When we bring in an interpreter to do a site translation, they're often not prepared. So we want to be able to give them an equal experience. So before they do this, we, sometimes we'll translate things from English to Spanish. We want to make sure that the concepts are equitable, that the message is being conveyed correctly. The same is true for our deaf individuals. We want to make sure that the ASL version is also conveying the correct concepts. Another problem that we've experienced, though, is the responses that we get back. We have responses in English that require you to respond yes, no, go back, go forward. So the next step here is to use AI to detect signs in responses to allow more of an interactive experience while informed consent is happening within the language of ASL. It'll be wonderful. We also want to give English equivalent in sign language. So we have a person, well, often, medical professionals, nurses, doctors will be watching the situation, and they need to be understanding what's happening as well, that they're being given informed consent as well. So we want to have a bilingual process, given in both sign language and English, transcription and signs, so that everyone in the room can understand what's happening. Everyone understands that informed consent is being given and that the patient understands what they are consenting to. So it's a program that's still in progress. We hope to continue building on this model where the app is accessible for both English speakers and American Sign Language users. It will be hard. It's a hard problem that we're tackling, but if we set it up correctly from the beginning, it'll provide a equitable access and will also be a meeting of the minds. And the intention of informed consent is achieved. So that is one example of a collaborative plan with hearing and deaf individuals working together.
So how are healthcare and accessibility folks responding to your project?
There's so many different perspectives within the medical field. It's not only an issue of informed consent, it's also the medical processes, the payments for medical procedures. All these little details need to be aligned between the hearing and deaf participants. And so that's where a dialogue is needed to figure out how we can involve the deaf person, patients, or medical professionals within that communication process of giving information, collecting information. These are very standard root processes that we could build in now into an app that will hopefully be fed into an AI system to be able to support communication process within healthcare system. We would love to see the connection between developers, researchers, and the healthcare professionals so that they can work together in these really important issues that, everyone needs healthcare access. So this is really important.
Yeah, Greg? Greg says, I just wanted to chime in on what we're saying. I think that it is so important for the technology people in this room to remember that we have a risk of data bias in AI. And that's why it's so important that we include both deaf and hearing people. AI has potential to really help in an extraordinary way. The way that we analyze things, the way that we think about healthcare systems and issues and challenges. But it goes back to the fact that we don't have the ability yet to collect data from deaf and hard of hearing individuals on the same level with the same efficiency that we do to collect this same information from hearing people. Hearing people can speak and just put this information into this potential AI system. So for deaf people not being able to do that yet, I think that makes the AI model be skewed, and it makes it so that people believe that they're coming up with the appropriate solution potentially, and that then the deaf and hard of hearing challenges are yet to be addressed. And there's no subject matter expert brought in. So I think that one thing that all of us have been worried about is how AI is going to impact our healthcare, because our healthcare is going to be guided by machines that were designed and contributed to from hearing people, with hearing people in mind. So I just want to make sure that we pay attention to that bias and manage for that bias in the next 10 to 15 years, and making sure that people who use sign language can have access to data as well. Sarah says, completely agree with you, Greg, on that ability to use that and to be able to benefit from the deaf and hard of hearing community. And if we can't benefit from it, then it should probably be a concern. Greg and Roshan, what do you envision a future project being?
Okay, I'll go first. So, as I said before, so our goal is to have our service available to deaf people as a reliable alternative wherever in-person services, access services are not available. And this is from our studies, we got to learn that there are a lot of situations where in-person services are not feasible in certain medical rooms, certain medical procedures. And also, oftentimes when deaf people try to schedule appointments at hospitals at the last minute, or in case of emergencies, it's very hard to have an in-person interpreter or captioner available. This is especially critical in rural areas because there are very few in-person services available. So our goal, or what we envision for the future, is to have a service as a reliable option whenever an in-person interpreter or captioner is unavailable to provide the services. And we want to reiterate that even through our studies, we found that in-person services are often the most optimal solution for interpreting, and we are not planning to replace it. We are trying to come up with a system where there is a backup option available in those situations. We also have some technological challenges, and especially with technology, with like battery life of the smart glasses. And we are also reliant on having an internet connection for our services to work. And there are often gaps in internet services available, and this is also critical in rural areas. So as the technology matures and as augmented reality products mature, and you can see that these days there are smart glasses that are available that are of much smaller form factors, which look as similar to our regular eyeglasses. So as the technology matures, we anticipate these issues to be resolved, and we are excited to see how the future opens up, and both for our product and as well as for all other accessibility-related technology products as well.
This is Greg signing. At the end of the day, we want to feel like human beings. I came to CSUN. I drove myself to the airport. I parked my car. I walked in, I checked my bags. I went through security at the airport. I found my gate. I boarded the plane. Landed, hailed an Uber, checked into my hotel. I did all that. My disability shows up when people try to talk to me. That's it. So sometimes, I would actually love a day when nobody talked to me at all to myself. It would be great. But that's not realistic. I envision a world where those interactions of when I get to the gate, or actually before that, when I check in my bag, the representative's there to communicate with me, either through American Sign Language or written. When a TSA agent starts talking to me, they're not barking orders at me, and I'm not concerned that I did something wrong. They're actually signing to me. But Unfortunately, they're trying to manufacture people through a system and get them to go through as quick as possible, and it's not personal. But you get to the gate, and the same thing, they're trying to deal with a group of 200 people waiting to board the plane. It's not a personalized experience. Getting to the hotel becomes a little bit more personalized if the staff, well, depends if the staff is trained to interact with deaf or hard of hearing individuals, or if they just stand there like, oh no, what do I do? So those interactions don't have to feel like a negative. It's not me, it's you. So I want to make sure that we can navigate our lives as efficiently, as smoothly as possible. And the solution for that, whether it's VR glasses or having VRI in healthcare, but really it's having direct communication access where we don't have to include a third party, or we don't have to feel like we have limited options of how to reach out and engage with people. Those are the thoughts that tend to be left out of our overall experience in design. So my ask really is that you make sure that you think about those interactions, those intersections where deaf people are navigating life and it's not designed for them. Try to make it so that we disrupt their lives less. That's the goal. Sarah says, wow, great answer. Thank you all so much for your time and thoughtful answers. I really have appreciated listening to what it is that you've had to say. I'm sure the audience has as well. Thank you so much for being a part of making communication barriers less and making it so that deaf and hard of hearing people are more connected with hearing people, less of a gap. Because what benefits deaf people and hard of hearing people will benefit hearing people as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent presentation on deaf and hard of hearing innovations. We're going to break till 3:20 when Mike Paciello and I will give a day wrap up from the fireside chats and this morning's live sessions. Back at 3:20.